And so I've made several CDs of spiritual music, and that engages my talent and my ability in something I enjoy in a spiritual process. So we can all do that. No matter what our thing is, we can find a way to link it with the spiritual purpose. Then it becomes karma yoga. Whereas normally it would produce karma that would bind us to the material world, when we use it in a spiritual process, it becomes liberating.
Right.
The very same thing. You know, it's just like in, how you doing, sweetie? It's just like in homeopathy. Mm-hmm. You take the same thing that would cause a medical condition, and then you use it in a medicinal way, and it clears that condition up. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about using the very material things that can act as a cause of bondage become a cause of freedom when they're applied in the proper way.
Right.
So it's really not about the thing. You know, like some people are like totally against drugs or totally against, you know, whatever,
right,
on some religious principle. But actually, those things, if they're engaged in the right way, with the proper set and setting, can also act as helpers.
Right.
Right. Like the ceremonies in the Andes in South America, and ayahuasca and stuff like that. They're always done in a sacred setting. Mm-hmm. They're never done like in a party mode. The thing that makes those things dangerous is when they're separated from that context of sacredness.
Right.
But that's what makes anything dangerous. As soon as we separate it from its origin, as soon as we separate it from the spiritual context, then it becomes a cause of material consciousness.
Right. I think that's what took me the longest with this, was I was trying to understand it logically, trying to put into words what I was doing and what I was feeling, but I don't believe it should be. It should be something you feel, not like necessarily have to understand.
Well, we can understand it, but the logic is different. Mm-hmm. It's not material logic, it's spiritual logic. Mm-hmm. So when we understand how spirit works, then it's quite logical. Right. It's just transcendental in logic. Mm-hmm. We were talking last night about Aristotelian logic. That's the logic we use in most material thoughts. Aristotelian logic means something is either true or false. It's either right or wrong. It's either good or bad. It's either lawful or unlawful. It's either spiritual or material, right? But in transcendental logic, something can be both of those at the same time. Mm-hmm. Or it can be something in between. Or it can be another value that hasn't anything to do with those polarities. Spiritual thought requires a more advanced form of logic that's technically called non-Aristotelian logic. And when we learn non-Aristotelian logic, which is required for things like quantum mechanics anyway,
right.
You know, so you can't say it's not scientific. It's very scientific. But it's just not, it doesn't observe the limitations of what we know about material objects. Like, for example, we know that two material objects can't penetrate one another, right? But that's not true in non-Aristotelian logic. Mm-hmm. In non-Aristotelian logic, for example, the soul and the body can be present in one place at the same time, and there's no contradiction. Mm-hmm. Even though they're different things, they interpenetrate one another because they have different nature. So like that, we need to understand the soul with a new kind of logic. It's actually not new, it's very, very old.
Right.
Just in our culture it's been suppressed and we don't know it. But it's all very logical. It just takes a while to understand how the logic of spirit works. And then we can think about it, we can reason about it, and we can arrive at reliable results. Whereas if we try to think about spirit with material logic, we'll always get it wrong. Right. That's what material religion does. It tries to apply material logic to spiritual subjects, and as a result it comes up with crazy answers. Right. Nonsensical. So are you guys going to stay this time?
Oh, I can't. I have plans.
Oh, that's too bad.
You gonna see this?
It's my niece, Sarah.
Oh, Sarah. Right, your niece. Okay.
Zolia.
Oh, good. So Aaliyah's going to stay with us. That's great. Okay. So now I'd like to talk about 2012. Oh, I forgot to look for those graphics. I'm just going to draw them on the board. What the heck? Okay. It's more fun to draw anyway. So like we talked about before, time means change. Everything that's in time is changing. Like every minute our bodies are getting older, right? And things come into existence and they live for a certain length of time and then they disappear. So everything is going through changes. In fact, if something changes, we can say it's definitely material. Things that go through transformations, you know, like the seasons. Or like these bushes, they grow up, they make so many leaves, then the leaves fall off and they go into the ground, and over the winter time they decompose, and in the spring they're like soil. Well, these are transformations. It's the same matter, the same atoms, the same substance, yet it's going through transformations of form. And that's typical of material things. But what about those transformations? Well, some of the things we see is that they occur in cycles. And these cycles repeat over and over and over again. Another thing that we see is that there's a pattern to the changes. They occur in a certain order. There's a structure to them. Okay? And if we know that structure, we can determine what changes are going to happen next. That's what science is supposed to be about. Okay? The kind of science that we have now is based on observation. We take a look at the patterns, we observe them, we analyze them, and then we try to predict what's going to happen next. That's called a theory. And if we get our theory right, it really does predict what's going to happen next. And then we can say, okay, we accept that theory, that's scientific. But if the theory doesn't predict accurately, it means we got something wrong, we have to try again. So basically, when we look at time, before we looked at time in terms of dimensions, now I'd like to look at time in terms of patterns. The basic pattern is, remember? Anybody remember what the basic pattern of time is? Well, yeah, it moves one way, but what stages does it go through? What are the 7 stages? Remember?
Birth.
What comes before birth?
Oh, yeah.
Gestation.
Gestation.
Or conception.
Conception, gestation, birth, then what?
Adolescence.
Well, what happens between birth
Growth.
and adolescence? Growth, right. Then what?
Deterioration.
No, there's another stage.
Mature.
Work or reproduction. Production of byproducts. Then deterioration and finally death. So these 7 stages are visible in every material thing. Every material body, every material object. That's one kind of pattern. Another kind of pattern is there in cycles, like the 4 seasons. Winter, spring, summer, fall, always going around in a pattern like that. And then there are patterns within the patterns, and so on. So these cycles produce typical patterns. And one of those patterns is called a logarithmic curve. The logarithmic curve looks like this. This would be the 0 point, and this would be like infinity. A logarithmic curve is actually the sum of many other curves. Mathematically speaking, it's a bunch of quantum leaps. But the first quantum leaps are at a low energy level, so they're very small. But as the quantum leaps increase in energy, they become higher. Each leap is higher and higher, and the final leap just goes right off the scale. So each of these is a combination of other curves that are going on beneath it, and they're coming faster and faster and adding up into more and more change. And this is the kind of pattern that we have today. I think I am going to get some of these slides up because this is really hard to explain just by drawing.
Do you want a DLP projector?
Oh, that's right. We didn't get the projector out, did we? That's a good idea. Courses 2012.